If you've ever reached a point in life where you've looked around and thought, how did I end up here? This video's for you. Because once you've realized you're on autopilot, you have a choice. You can carry on drifting or you can start steering that wheel again. And the good news is you don't need to completely rebuild your life. You don't need a complete overhaul. You don't need to burn all the bridges and start over. You just need to make conscious choices again. In this video, I'm going to show you 3 things that helped me and have helped others begin creating momentum when life started feeling like the same week repeated over and over again. If you haven't watched part 1 yet, go and watch that first, because in part 1 we looked at why drift happens and how most people don't even realize it's happening. Today we're looking at what to do about it, and in part 3 I'll show you a simple framework that's designed to help you identify what's missing and how to create a clear direction for your next chapter. Let's get into it. I'm a believer that you can't change a life you're unwilling to honestly look at. You see, most people know something isn't right. It's just that it's too painful to look at so closely. Instead, they stay busy. They distract themselves. They tell themselves they'll deal with it later. They procrastinate and put it off. The problem is, later never arrives. One thing I learned going through my own divorce was that avoiding reality, the truth, doesn't make things easier. It just delays that moment. You have to deal with it. There came a point where I had stopped focusing on what had happened and actually started looking honestly at where I really was, what was working, what wasn't, what needed to change, what I was going to keep, what I was going to throw out. And that's uncomfortable. Most people don't enjoy asking themselves difficult questions like, what's draining my energy? What have I really been avoiding? Where am I settling for? What part of my life feels out of alignment? But until you answer those kind of questions, you're trying to navigate without knowing where you are. And that's impossible. The first step isn't action, it's awareness. It's honest awareness. Because I don't think you can change a life you're unwilling to take a real hard look at. Once you know where you are, the next mistake most people make is trying to fix everything at once. One of the biggest mistakes I see is people convincing themselves that everything needs rebuilding from the ground up. Their health, their relationships, their career, their confidence, their habits, everything. The reality is usually much simpler. Most of the time there's one area that can create a spark, a momentum for everything else in their life. That first domino. For some people that's getting physically stronger. For others it's improving a relationship. For somebody else it might be finally creating some structure in their week. The important thing isn't which domino you choose, it's choosing one. After my divorce, I didn't have every answer. I didn't suddenly know exactly what the next chapter looked like. What I did know was that standing still wasn't helping. So I started focusing on the things I could control. Small actions, small decisions, small wins, and those small wins started stacking up and creating momentum. Momentum created confidence, and that confidence created action. And that action is what created change. Most people wait until they feel motivated. I've found it usually works the other way around. You take action first and then the motivation catches up. Which brings us to the most important shift of all. I don't think the goal is self-improvement. I think the goal is self-leadership. They're 2 different things. Self-improvement often becomes another endless project on your big to-do list. Another thing to fix, another thing to optimize. Self-leadership, however, is different. It's simply deciding that you're going to take responsibility for where your life is heading. Not perfectly, not every day, just consistently. One thing I encourage people to do is ask themselves 4 simple questions every week. What am I moving towards? What am I saying yes to? What am I saying no to? And am I acting by design or by default? Those 4 questions sound simple, but they really force you to stay awake. They stop drifting, creeping back in. Because ultimately, the difference between a fulfilled life and a frustrated life is often that conscious choice, one decision at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 year at a time. Most people never hit rock bottom. They simply coast year after year. The men who change their lives aren't necessarily smarter, they're not tougher, they're not luckier. At some point, they simply decided to wake up and take back the wheel. And if that's where you are right now, then part 3 is definitely for you, because awareness is important, action is important, but eventually you need clarity. You need to know what's actually missing. You need to know what your next chapter actually could look like. And that's exactly what we're going to cover in part 3. I'll see you there.